My son texted, "We need space from you, please don't reach out anymore at all." So I changed my will that same night. The text came at 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of preparing dinner, pot roast, my son Michael's favorite, even though he hadn't been over for dinner in 6 months. Old habits die hard, and I suppose I'd been clinging to the hope that maybe this weekend would be different, that maybe he'd finally accept one of my invitations. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up, expecting maybe a grocery store promotion or a reminder about a doctor's appointment. Instead, it was from Michael. "Mom, I need to be honest with you. Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it's best if we take some space from you. We need to focus on our family right now, and your constant calls and texts are overwhelming. Please don't reach out anymore, at all. We'll contact you if and when we're ready." I read it 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. Please don't reach out anymore, at all. I stood there in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd made countless meals for him, where I'd packed his school lunches for 12 years, where I'd baked birthday cakes and Christmas cookies and every comfort food he'd ever requested, and felt something break inside me that I knew would never fully heal. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. The pot roast was still in the oven, filling the house with the smell of Sunday dinners from 20 years ago, back when Michael was a boy who thought I hung the moon, back before he met Jessica, and everything changed. I turned off the oven and sat down at the kitchen table. 73 years old, and my son had just told me not to contact him anymore, through a text message, not even a phone call, not even the courtesy of hearing my voice one last time before cutting me out of his life entirely. I'd known things had been strained. Of course I had. Jessica had made it clear from the beginning that she didn't like me, though I'd never understood why. I'd been nothing but welcoming, nothing but kind. I'd thrown them an engagement party, helped pay for the wedding, babysat my grandchildren whenever they asked. But it was never enough, or maybe it was too much. Jessica had a way of making me feel like I was intruding even when I'd been invited. She'd made comments about my old-fashioned parenting advice, about how I needed to let Michael live his own life, about how I was too involved. And slowly, Michael had pulled away. The weekly phone calls became monthly. The holiday visits became shorter. The grandchildren who used to run to me with hugs started looking uncomfortable when I tried to hold them. I'd felt it happening, felt the distance growing, but I told myself it was just a phase, just the normal evolution of a son growing into his own life. I'd told myself that if I just gave them space, if I just stopped being so needy, things would get better. But they hadn't gotten better, they'd gotten worse, and now this, "Please don't reach out anymore, at all." I sat at that table as the afternoon light faded into evening, and I thought about everything I'd sacrificed for Michael. His father had left when Michael was 5, just packed his bags one day and disappeared, leaving me to raise our son alone on a secretary's salary. I'd worked 2 jobs to afford his private school tuition. I'd skipped meals so he could have new clothes. I'd put off my own retirement savings to pay for his college, to help with the down payment on his first house, to buy the grandchildren everything they needed. I'd given him everything. And he'd sent me a text message telling me to leave him alone. The anger came slowly at first, a low burn beneath the grief. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, it built into something harder, something colder. I'd spent 50 years putting Michael first, 50 years of sacrifice and service and unconditional love, and this was how it ended, with a text message demanding I disappear from his life. At 8 o'clock, I called my lawyer. Richard Morton had handled my affairs for 20 years, my will, my estate planning, everything. He was semi-retired now, but he'd always told me to call if I needed anything. "Margaret," his voice was warm with surprise. "Is everything all right?" "No, Richard, everything is not all right. I need to change my will, tonight if possible." There was a pause. "Tonight? Margaret, what's happened?" I told him about the text, about years of watching my son pull away, of being made to feel like a burden, of sacrificing everything and being repaid with rejection. "I want Michael completely removed from my will," I said, my voice steady now, hardened by resolve. "Everything I was leaving to him, I want it redirected." "Margaret, that's a significant decision. Perhaps you should take some time to think about it." "I've had 6 hours to think about it, Richard. And before that, I've had years of watching my son choose his wife over his mother at every turn, years of being pushed aside and made to feel like my love was an inconvenience. I'm done. I want him out." "All right," Richard said slowly. "I can draft the changes tomorrow and have them ready for your signature by end of business. Can't we do it now over the phone? I know there's some kind of emergency provision. There are video notary services we can use, yes. But Margaret, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain? Once we make these changes and you pass, there's no going back. Michael will have no claim to your estate." "Good. That's exactly what I want." We spent the next 2 hours on a video call, going through every provision of my will. My estate wasn't massive, I'd never been wealthy, but decades of careful saving, and the house I'd owned free and clear for 30 years meant I had about $800,000 to leave behind. It had all been designated for Michael. Every penny. Now none of it would go to him. So where would you like the assets to go instead? Richard asked. I thought about that, about who in my life had actually been there for me, who had valued my presence instead of treating it like a burden. Divide it equally between St. Jude's Children's Hospital, the animal shelter where I volunteer, and a scholarship fund at the community college. I want it to go to non-traditional students, people my age or older who are going back to school, and nothing to Michael, not even a token amount, nothing. I want the will to explicitly state that he's been intentionally excluded. I want it in writing that this wasn't an oversight. That's quite a statement, Margaret. It needs to be, because when I'm gone and he finds out, I want him to understand exactly what he lost. I want him to know that his mother's love wasn't unlimited, that there were consequences to throwing me away like I was nothing. By 11 o'clock, it was done. My new will was signed, witnessed, notarized, and legally binding. Michael would inherit nothing. The son I'd sacrificed everything for would get exactly what he'd given me in return. Nothing. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt like a terrible mother. But all I felt was a grim sense of justice, and beneath that, a grief so deep it felt like drowning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Michael's childhood, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too loving, too involved, too present? Or had I simply raised a man who'd learned to value me only for what I could give him, and once his wife provided everything he needed, I became expendable? The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. 73 years old, grey hair that I'd stopped dyeing because Michael's wife had made a comment about how natural looked better at my age. Lines around my eyes from 50 years of smiling and worrying and crying. Hands that were starting to ache with arthritis. Hands that had worked so hard for so long to give my son everything. I looked like someone's grandmother, someone's mother, someone who should be surrounded by family, not standing alone in a bathroom wondering if her own son would even come to her funeral. My phone sat on the counter, silent. I'd checked it 40 times since waking up, some desperate part of me hoping Michael would text again, that he'd say he'd been rash, that he was sorry, that of course he still wanted me in his life, but there was nothing. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper, the same routine I'd followed for decades, but everything felt different now. The house felt emptier, the silence felt heavier, the future felt like a vast stretch of loneliness with nothing to look forward to. I'd built my entire life around being Michael's mother, and now that he'd told me he didn't want me anymore, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. The doorbell rang at 10:30. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely had visitors anymore. Most of my friends had died or moved to be closer to their own families. The few people I still knew from church only saw me on Sundays. I opened the door to find my neighbor, Helen, standing on the porch with a concerned expression. "Margaret, I saw you haven't picked up your newspaper. Are you feeling all right?" I'd forgotten the newspaper on the driveway. Another sign that I was coming apart. "I'm fine, Helen. Just a rough night." She studied my face with the keen eye of someone who'd known loss herself. "You don't look fine. Why don't I make us some tea?" I should have said no. I should have maintained the fiction that everything was okay, that I was handling things just fine on my own. But Helen's kindness, unexpected and genuine, cracked something open in me. "That would be nice," I heard myself say. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd stood reading Michael's text yesterday, and I told Helen everything. About the text, about the years of being pushed aside, about changing my will in the middle of the night. Helen listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you did." "Did I? He's my son, Helen." What kind of mother disinherits her own child? The kind who finally recognizes when she's being taken for granted. "Margaret, I've watched you for years waiting by the phone for Michael to call, making excuses for why he couldn't visit, defending his wife even when she was obviously rude to you. You've bent yourself into knots trying to maintain a relationship with someone who doesn't value you. At some point, you have to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. But he's all I have. No, you have yourself, and that has to be enough, because clearly he's decided you're not enough for him." The truth of that hit harder than I expected. I wasn't enough for my son, the woman who'd given up everything for him, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities, who'd loved him unconditionally for 48 years. I wasn't enough. "What do I do now?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "Now you start living for yourself. You join that book club you've been putting off. You take that trip to Scotland you've always wanted to take. You volunteer more at the animal shelter. because it makes you happy, not because you're filling time until Michael calls. You build a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for someone who's made it clear they don't want to be waited for. I don't know if I can. You can. Because the alternative is spending whatever years you have left being miserable and hoping he changes his mind. And Margaret, people like that don't change their minds. They just get better at taking you for granted. After Helen left, I sat with her words. Build a life that doesn't revolve around waiting. I'd been waiting for so long. Waiting for Michael to call. Waiting for invitations to visit. Waiting for my grandchildren to remember I existed. Waiting for some sign that I still mattered to the people I'd loved most. I was done waiting. I picked up my phone and texted the coordinator at the animal shelter. I'd like to increase my volunteer hours if there's space. Let me know what you need. Then I called the travel agency in town and asked about tours to Scotland. And finally, I opened my laptop and started researching that book club Helen had mentioned. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel healed. But for the first time since Michael's text had arrived, I felt like maybe there was a version of my life that didn't end in complete despair. My phone buzzed. For one wild, hopeful moment, I thought it might be Michael. It was the shelter coordinator. "We'd love more help. Can you come by tomorrow to discuss?" I typed back yes and set the phone down. Michael had asked for space. He was going to get exactly what he'd asked for. He just didn't know yet how much space he was actually going to have, not just from my calls and texts, but from my life entirely. And when I was gone, when he learned that every penny I'd been saving for him had gone to strangers and causes instead, maybe then he'd understand what he'd thrown away. Or maybe he wouldn't understand at all. Maybe he'd just shrug and move on, the way he'd already moved on from me. Either way, it wouldn't be my problem anymore. I'd spent enough of my life loving someone who couldn't be bothered to love me back. Now I was going to spend what was left loving the life I'd neglected while waiting for him to notice I existed. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner. Not pot roast, something I actually wanted, and I ate it slowly at the table with a good book propped open beside me. And when I caught myself reaching for my phone to check if Michael had called, I set it in another room and went back to my book. It was a small thing, but it felt like the beginning of something necessary. It felt like letting go. 3 weeks passed without a word from Michael. I'd be lying if I said I didn't check my phone compulsively those first few days, hope and dread mixing every time it buzzed. But it was always someone else. The shelter, Helen, the book club I'd finally joined. Never Michael. By the 4th week, something shifted. I stopped reaching for my phone first thing in the morning. I stopped composing texts in my head that I'd never send. I stopped rehearsing what I'd say if he called to apologize. I started living instead of waiting. The animal shelter became my sanctuary. I'd always volunteered on Wednesdays, but now I went 4 times a week. There was something healing about the dogs who were happy to see me simply because I showed up, who didn't care about my age or my usefulness, or whether I was too much. They just wanted love, and I had so much of it that was no longer wanted elsewhere. "You're a natural with the older dogs," Clara, the shelter director, told me one afternoon. I was sitting in a kennel with a grey-muzzled golden retriever named Duke, who'd been returned by 3 different families. "They trust you. Maybe because I understand what it's like to be discarded," I said, then immediately regretted being so honest. But Clara just nodded. "A lot of our best volunteers have been through something. They get that these animals aren't broken. They're just waiting for someone who sees their value." Duke rested his head on my lap, and I scratched behind his ears. "I think I might want to adopt him." The words surprised me as much as they surprised Clara. I hadn't had a dog since Michael was a teenager. His father had hated animals, and after the divorce, I'd been too busy working to properly care for one. "Really, Margaret, that's wonderful. Duke would be perfect for you." "I have the time now," I said, and it was true. I had all the time in the world now that I wasn't spending it waiting for phone calls that never came. 2 days later, Duke came home with me. The house felt less empty with him in it. He followed me from room to room, settled at my feet while I read, slept beside my bed at night. He needed me in a way that was simple and uncomplicated, and I discovered I'd been starving for that kind of straightforward affection. The book club turned out to be more social than I'd anticipated. 7 women, most around my age, who met every other Tuesday at the library to discuss whatever we were reading. But the books were almost secondary to the conversation. We talked about our lives, our disappointments, our small victories. "My daughter hasn't called in 2 months, a woman named Patricia said during our 3rd meeting. "She says I'm exhausting to deal with. I don't even know what that means. I just want to be part of her life." I felt that in my bones. My son asked me not to contact him anymore. Said he needs space. The words still hurt to say out loud, but less than they had a month ago. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's their loss. They don't deserve us." I wasn't sure I believed that yet, but I appreciated hearing it. At the 8-week mark, I booked the trip to Scotland. 2 weeks touring the Highlands, something I'd dreamed about for years but had never done because the money always needed to go somewhere else. Michael's college, Michael's wedding, Michael's children. Now the money could go to me. Richard called to check on me a few days before I left. How are you holding up, Margaret? Better than I expected. I'm going to Scotland next week. Scotland, that's wonderful. And have you heard from Michael? No, and I don't expect to. Have you thought about what you'll do if he does reach out? I had thought about it. A lot. I don't know, Richard. Part of me wants him to apologize, to realize what he's done. But another part of me knows that even if he did, something's broken that can't be fixed. He threw away 30 years of relationship with a text message. I don't know how you come back from that. Well, if it helps, I think you're handling this with remarkable grace. I don't feel graceful. I feel like I'm just trying to survive. That is grace, Margaret. Getting up every day and choosing to move forward instead of falling apart. That's all grace is. Scotland was transformative. I traveled with a small tour group, 8 other Americans, most traveling solo, most around my age. We hiked through green hills, toured ancient castles, listened to traditional music in cozy pubs. I made friends with a retired teacher from Oregon named Susan, who'd lost her husband 2 years ago and was learning to travel alone. My kids think I'm crazy, she told me over dinner one evening in Edinburgh. They wanted me to stay home, stay safe, stay small. But I realized if I kept living my life according to what they wanted, I'd never live at all. My son doesn't want me in his life at all, I found myself saying. He told me not to contact him anymore. Susan's expression softened with understanding. Then he's a fool. And you know what? His loss. You're here in Scotland, living your life. He's the one who's missing out. I wanted to believe that. And standing there in Edinburgh at sunset, with new friends and adventures still ahead, I almost did. I came home with a camera full of photos, a suitcase full of souvenirs, and something I hadn't felt in years. Contentment, not happiness exactly. The wound Michael had left was still too fresh for that, but a sense that my life had value beyond being someone's mother. Duke greeted me at the door like I'd been gone for years, and I knelt down to hug him, feeling grateful for this uncomplicated love. 2 days after I got back, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. I'd gotten good at ignoring calls I didn't recognize, but something made me pick up. Is this Margaret Foster? A woman's voice, professional and slightly cautious. Yes, this is she. Mrs. Foster, my name is Amanda Chen. I'm a social worker at Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Michael Foster. My heart stopped. Is he okay? What happened? He's stable now, but he was in a car accident yesterday. He's going to be fine. Some broken ribs and a concussion, but nothing life-threatening. He asked us to call you. He asked them to call me. After 2 months of silence, after telling me not to contact him, after cutting me out of his life, now when he needed something, he remembered I existed. What hospital? I asked, already grabbing my keys. Memorial downtown. He's in room 412. Visiting hours are until 8. I called Helen on the way to ask if she could let Duke out. My hands were shaking as I drove, and I couldn't tell if it was from worry or anger or some toxic combination of both. Michael was sitting up in bed when I arrived, his face bruised, his arm in a sling. Jessica was in the chair beside him, and she looked up when I walked in with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom, Michael said, and his voice cracked slightly. You came. Of course I came. You're my son. Even after everything, even after the text, even after the silence, of course I came. Jessica stood up. I'll give you two some privacy. She left without meeting my eyes, and I wondered if she felt guilty or if she just didn't want to be there for whatever conversation was about to happen. I sat down in the chair she'd vacated. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. Which, technically, I kind of did. He tried to smile, but it faded quickly. Mom, I'm sorry. About the text. About everything. Are you? Or are you just sorry because you needed me and realized I might not come? He flinched. That's not fair. Neither was that text message, Michael. Neither were the 2 months of silence. Neither was being told I'm too overwhelming for my own son to deal with. Jessica thought. What did you think, Michael? When did you stop having your own thoughts about your mother? He looked away. She said you were smothering me, that you called too much, that you were always inviting yourself over, that I needed to set boundaries. I called once a week. I invited you for dinner once a month. I asked to see my grandchildren when it was convenient for you. If that's smothering, then I don't know what normal family relationships look like anymore. I know, okay? I handled it badly. I should have talked to you instead of sending that text. You should have defended me to your wife. You should have told her that your mother, who raised you alone, who sacrificed everything for you, who never asked for anything except to be part of your life. You should have told her that I deserved better than to be treated like an inconvenience. Tears were running down his face now. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I was wrong. I looked at my son, this man I'd carried for 9 months, delivered in a difficult labor that had nearly killed us both, raised through every childhood illness and teenage crisis and young adult mistake. This person I'd loved more than life itself, and I felt tired. I believe you're sorry, I said quietly, but I don't know if sorry is enough anymore. What does that mean? It means you hurt me in a way I don't know how to forgive. It means you threw away our relationship like it was nothing, and I don't know how to trust that you won't do it again the next time Jessica decides I'm too much. I won't. I promise I won't. You promised to love and honor me the day I became your mother, Michael. You broke that promise with a text message, so forgive me if your promises don't mean as much as they used to. I stood up. I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad the accident wasn't worse, but I can't do this right now. I can't just pretend the last 2 months didn't happen because you're hurt and scared. Mom, please don't leave like this. You told me to leave. You told me not to reach out anymore. I'm just doing what you asked. I made it to my car before I started crying. Great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. Because even though I'd meant every word I said to him, even though I knew I was right to be angry, he was still my son. And seeing him hurt, even after what he'd done, had torn open wounds I'd been trying to heal. I drove home and cried on Helen's shoulder for an hour, while Duke pressed against my legs, offering what comfort he could. What do? I asked Helen. How do I forgive him? How do I not forgive him? You don't have to decide right now, she said. You can sit with this. You can let him prove whether he means it or not. You don't owe him immediate forgiveness just because he's finally sorry. Michael called the next day. I let it go to voicemail. He called again that evening, another voicemail. By the 3rd day, there were 6 voicemails I hadn't listened to and a dozen text messages I hadn't read. Finally, Helen convinced me to at least read the texts. I'm so sorry, Mum. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. Jessica and I are going to counseling. We're working on things. I want to do better. I miss you. The kids miss you. I know I don't have the right to say that, but it's true. Please, Mum, let me try to make this right. I stared at those messages for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to accept his apology and go back to the way things were. But the way things were had been me constantly accommodating, constantly accepting less than I deserved, constantly making excuses for being pushed aside. I didn't want to go back to that. Instead, I called Richard. I need to know something, I said. If I let Michael back into my life, does that invalidate the will changes? No. The will stands as written unless you explicitly change it again. Why? Because I think I might be willing to rebuild a relationship with my son, but I'm not willing to go back to being taken for granted. And knowing that will is there, knowing that there are consequences if he hurts me again, maybe that's what I need to feel safe enough to try. That's very wise, Margaret. I don't feel wise. I feel like I'm one bad decision away from being right back where I started. Then take it slow. Set boundaries. See if he respects them, and know that you have the power to walk away if he doesn't. I texted Michael back. I need time. I'm not ready to just pick up where we left off. If you're serious about making amends, you'll give me the space to heal that you asked me to give you. His response came within minutes. I understand. Take all the time you need. I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. Words I hadn't heard from him in so long they almost felt foreign. I didn't say it back. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Love wasn't just words anymore. It was going to have to be actions, consistency, proof that he meant what he said. And until he showed me that, I was going to keep building the life I'd started creating without him. A life with Duke and book club, and the shelter, and friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. A life where I was enough, all by myself. Michael could be part of that life if he proved he deserved to be, but he'd have to earn his way back in, and he'd have to do it knowing that even if he succeeded, even if we rebuilt our relationship, he'd already lost something he could never get back. $800,000 worth of consequences for a text message that had tried to erase me from his life. I hadn't told him about the will yet. Part of me wondered if I ever would, or if I'd just let him find out after I was gone. Either way, he'd learn eventually that throwing people away had a cost, and that cost was everything. Michael was persistent. I had to give him that. For the next 2 months, he called every Sunday afternoon, the same time I used to call him, back when I was the one doing all the work to maintain our relationship. He sent photos of the grandchildren. He invited me to dinner, always making it clear that the invitation was from him, not just Jessica. I declined most of them, not out of spite, but because I needed to see if his effort would last once I wasn't immediately rewarding it. I needed to know if he'd keep trying even when it was hard, even when I wasn't making it easy for him. He did, and slowly, cautiously, I started to thaw. The first dinner I accepted was in November, 4 months after the text that had changed everything. I brought Duke with me, partly as emotional support, partly as a test. Jessica had always wrinkled her nose at the idea of pets, but when I arrived, Michael had set up water bowls and bought dog treats. "I know Duke is important to you," he said simply. "He's welcome here any time." It was a small thing, but it mattered. It showed he was paying attention, that he was thinking about what I needed, instead of just what was convenient. Dinner was awkward at first. The grandchildren, Emma, 8, and Noah, 6, were shy around me like I was a stranger they vaguely remembered. Jessica was polite but distant, and I couldn't tell if she resented my presence or was just uncomfortable with the situation she'd helped create. But Michael tried. He asked about Scotland, about the shelter, about the book club. He listened when I answered, asked follow-up questions, seemed genuinely interested in my life. It felt like meeting my son again for the first time. As I was leaving, Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, can we come visit you and Duke sometime?" My heart cracked open a little. "I'd like that very much." Michael walked me to the car. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." "No, it wasn't. But I'm trying, Michael. I'm trying to believe you mean it this time." "I do, I promise I do." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital, about how I chose Jessica over you, and you were right. I let her convince me that setting boundaries with you meant cutting you off completely. I let her make me feel guilty for wanting to see my own mother. And now we're in counseling. Like I said, working on communication, on me standing up for what I need, on her understanding that my relationship with you doesn't take anything away from our marriage." What changed her mind? He looked uncomfortable. Honestly, the accident scared her, made her realize that life is short, and she didn't want to be the reason I had regrets. And her own mother reached out, wanted to reconcile after years of not speaking. I think it made her see things differently. So Jessica had her own family drama. I suppose that made sense. Hurt people, and maybe she'd been projecting her own issues onto my relationship with Michael. I didn't forgive her, not yet, but I understood her a little better. The Sunday calls continued. The dinners became more regular. By Christmas, things had improved enough that I agreed to spend the holiday with them. It was the first Christmas I'd spent with Michael and the grandchildren in 3 years, and it was both wonderful and bittersweet. Wonderful to see the kids open presents, to help cook dinner, to feel like part of the family again. Bittersweet because I kept thinking about all the holidays I'd missed, all the time I'd lost, all the hurt that couldn't be undone no matter how many apologies were offered. On Christmas evening, after the kids were in bed, Michael and I sat in the living room with coffee while Jessica cleaned up in the kitchen. "This was nice," he said, "having you here. It felt right." "It did," I agreed. "But Michael, I need to be honest with you. I'm still healing. Some days I'm fine, and some days I look at you and I'm angry all over again about that text message, about the months of silence, about feeling like I didn't matter. I understand, and I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what else to do except show you I've changed. You are showing me, and I appreciate it. I just need you to know that our relationship isn't what it used to be, and it might never be. There's going to be a distance now that wasn't there before." A caution. He nodded, his eyes sad. "That's fair. That's more than fair. I just hope that eventually the distance might get smaller. Maybe it will. Time will tell." Jessica came into the room then, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Margaret, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately." Michael looked surprised but stood up. "I'll give you two some space." After he left, Jessica sat down in his spot, perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to flee at any moment. "I owe you an apology," she said abruptly. "I've been avoiding it because I'm embarrassed, but Michael's right. I need to say it." I waited. "I was jealous of you." That sounds stupid, but it's true. Michael talked about you all the time when we first started dating, about how you raised him alone, how you sacrificed everything for him. And instead of respecting that, I felt threatened by it, like I could never measure up, like I'd always be compared to you. I never wanted to compete with you, Jessica. I know that now, but back then I didn't. So I started pointing out every time you called, every time you wanted to visit, every time you offered advice. I made it seem like you were smothering him, when really, you were just being a mother who loved her son. Why are you telling me this now? Because Michael almost died in that accident, and when I was sitting in the hospital waiting room, I realized that if he'd died, you would have lost him without ever knowing how much he loved you, and that would have been my fault. She wiped at her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm trying to be better. I looked at this woman who'd been the villain in my story for so long, and I saw something I'd missed before, someone young and insecure, making mistakes because she didn't know how to handle her own feelings. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully, and I'm willing to try to move forward. But Jessica, if you ever come between me and my son again, If you ever make him choose between us, I will walk away and I won't come back. I've learned that I can survive without him. I don't want to, but I can, and I won't put myself through that kind of pain again. I understand I won't, I promise. I didn't fully trust her promise, but it was a start. The new year brought more consistency. Michael called every Sunday like clockwork. I had dinner with them twice a month. The grandchildren started asking to come visit me, and I'd take them to the shelter to help walk the dogs, or to the park with Duke. It felt like rebuilding a house that had burned down. Nothing would ever be quite the same as the original, but maybe the new version could be sturdy enough to trust. In March, Michael asked if he could take me to lunch, just the two of us. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, and after we ordered, he pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to give you this," he said. "It's not much, but it's a start." Inside was a check for $5,000. I stared at it. "Michael, what is this for?" "For your birthday, and for all the birthdays I missed or half-assed over the past few years, and for some of what you spent on me over the years that I never properly thanked you for. I don't want your money. I know you don't, but I want to give it to you anyway. You paid for my college, Mom. You helped with my house down payment. You've bought the kids more gifts than I can count. Let me do this one thing, please." I looked at the check, at my son's hopeful face, and I felt something complicated. Pride that he wanted to give back. Sadness that he thought money could fix what had been broken. And underneath it all, a small, bitter voice asking where this generosity had been when he'd told me to leave him alone. "Thank you," I said, folding the check and putting it in my purse. I'd donate it to the shelter, but he didn't need to know that. "Mum, I've been thinking about something else," he said. "About your future, about making sure you're taken care of." "I'm fine, Michael. I have my pension, my social security, the house." "I know, but I want to make sure." I was talking to a financial advisor, and he suggested we should review your estate planning, make sure everything is in order, that you have a will, that kind of thing. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "Why the sudden interest in my estate planning?" "It's not sudden. It's just, you're 73, Mom. These are things we should talk about. I want to make sure you're protected, that your wishes are clear." "My wishes are very clear. I have a will. Everything is in order. But when was the last time you updated it? Things change. We should review it together. Make sure—" "Michael," I set down my cup carefully. "Why are you really asking about my will?" He looked uncomfortable. "I'm not. I just want to help. Do you know how much money I have?" "No, I just assumed. You've been so careful over the years, and the house is paid off. I have about $800,000. The house, my savings, some investments. Not a fortune, but more than most people my age have." I watched his face as he processed that number, watched something flicker in his eyes. Was it surprise? Calculation? Relief? "Mom, that's great. I'm glad you're secure. I just want to make sure that you're in the will." The words hung between us like a challenge. "That's not what I meant," he said, but his face was flushed. "Isn't it? You show back up in my life after months of silence. You're suddenly concerned about my estate planning. You want to review things together. It's a reasonable question, Michael. Are you worried about your inheritance?" "No, I'm worried about you." "Are you? Because it sounds like you're worried about what happens to my money when I die." "Mom, please, don't do this. Don't make this into something it's not." "Then tell me honestly, did Jessica suggest you ask about the will?" His silence was answer enough. I stood up, gathering my purse. "Thank you for lunch, and for the check, but I think I need to go now." "Mom, wait. My will is my business, Michael. When I die, you'll find out what's in it. Until then, I'd appreciate if you stopped treating our reconciliation like an investment in your future." I left him sitting there, and I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Had I been wrong? Had this whole reconciliation been motivated by money rather than genuine remorse? I called Richard as soon as I got home. "Did I overreact?" I asked, after explaining what had happened. "Maybe he really was just concerned about me. Maybe," Richard said carefully. "Or maybe your instincts were right. Margaret, it's not uncommon for family members to suddenly become very attentive when they realize there's an inheritance at stake. But he's been so consistent for months. Surely that means something. It might mean everything, or it might mean nothing. Only time will tell. But I'll say this. You were smart to keep the will changes private. If his motivations are pure, nothing changes. If they're not, you've protected yourself." Michael called 6 times that evening. I didn't answer. He texted, "Please, Mom, let me explain. It wasn't what it sounded like, but it was exactly what it sounded like. And the worst part was, I didn't know anymore if our entire reconciliation had been genuine or if he'd just been playing a long game to secure his inheritance." Helen came over when I told her what happened. We sat on the porch with Duke between us, and she let me talk through my feelings. "Here's what I think," she said when I'd finally exhausted myself. "I think Michael does love you. I think he is sorry for what he did. But I also think that doesn't mean he's above being practical about his future. People are complicated. They can feel genuine remorse and still think about money. The question is whether the money is the only reason he came back, or if it's just a factor. How do I figure that out? You watch. You wait. You see if his behavior changes now that you've shut down the will conversation. If he drifts away again, you'll know. If he stays consistent, well, maybe he deserves the benefit of the doubt. Michael did stay consistent. The Sunday calls continued. The dinner invitations kept coming. He never brought up the will again, and when I saw him, he seemed genuinely apologetic about the conversation at lunch. "I'm sorry," he said at our next dinner. "Jessica was worried about you, and I let her worry become my worry, and I approached it all wrong. You're right. Your will is your business. I shouldn't have pried. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the seed of doubt had been planted and I couldn't quite uproot it. That's when I decided I wasn't going to tell him about the will changes. Not now. Maybe not ever. If he stayed in my life because he genuinely wanted to, because he valued me for more than my money, then he'd never need to know. He'd inherit nothing, but at least our reconciliation would have been real. And if he drifted away again, if his attention waned once he realized there was nothing to gain, then I'd know the truth. Either way, the will would be the test he didn't know he was taking, and I'd finally have my answer about whether my son loved me or just loved what I could leave him. The weeks turned into months. Summer came, then fall. Michael remained constant, and slowly, painfully, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he meant it. But I never forgot that conversation about the will, and I never changed it back. 2 years passed. 2 years of Sunday phone calls and monthly dinners and grandchildren who finally remembered I was their grandmother. 2 years of watching Michael try, of seeing him show up consistently in ways he hadn't before. 2 years of wondering if it was real or if I was being played by someone who'd learned patience. I turned 75 in May. Michael threw me a birthday party. Nothing elaborate. Just family and a few friends from book club and the shelter. The grandchildren had made cards. Jessica had baked a cake. Michael gave a toast about how grateful he was to have me in his life. It was lovely. And underneath my smile, I still wondered if he knew. That fall, Duke started slowing down. The vet said it was just old age. He was 12 now, ancient for a golden retriever. But he was still happy, still followed me everywhere, still rested his head on my lap when I needed comfort. "He's been good for you," Helen observed one afternoon, as we watched Duke doze in a patch of sunlight. "Given you something to focus on besides Michael." "He's been everything I needed when I needed it," I agreed. "Unconditional love on my terms. Have you thought about what you'll do when—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. "When he's gone, I'll grieve, and then maybe I'll adopt another senior dog that needs someone. There's always another Duke waiting at the shelter." In November, I caught a cold that turned into bronchitis. It knocked me flat for 3 weeks, and for the first time since the accident, Michael stepped up in ways that reminded me of the boy he'd been before Jessica, before distance had grown between us. He brought groceries and medicine. He checked on me daily. He arranged for the grandchildren to make get-well cards. When I protested that he didn't need to fuss, he said, "Mum, let me take care of you for once. You spent my whole childhood taking care of me." Jessica came too. Brought homemade soup, sat with me when I was too tired to talk. It felt genuine, or maybe I'd just gotten better at convincing myself to believe them. By Christmas, I was recovered but tired in a way that felt different, deeper. I mentioned it to my doctor. "You're 75, Margaret," Dr. Peterson said gently. "Some tiredness is normal, but let's run some tests, just to be safe." The tests came back in January. Stage 3 kidney disease. Not immediately life-threatening, but progressive. With treatment and lifestyle changes, I might have 5 good years, maybe 10 if I was lucky. I sat in Dr. Peterson's office, absorbing the news with an odd sense of calm. I'd lived a full life. I had no major regrets anymore. If this was the beginning of the end, at least I'd gotten to rebuild something with Michael first. "Should I tell my son?" I asked Richard when I called to update my healthcare directive. "That's up to you. But Margaret, given the kidney disease, we should also discuss your estate planning again. Make sure everything is exactly as you want it." "It is. Nothing's changed." "You're certain? Even after 2 years of reconciliation with Michael?" I thought about that. About the Sunday calls and the birthday party and the way Michael had taken care of me when I was sick. About whether any of it was real or if he was just playing the long game. "I'm certain," I said finally. "If Michael has stayed consistent because he genuinely loves me, then he won't need the inheritance. He'll have had something more valuable. And if he's stayed consistent because he expects to inherit, then he doesn't deserve it anyway." That's a harsh test. It's the only test I have. And Richard, I want to add one more thing to the will. A letter to be given to Michael after I'm gone. explaining everything. I drafted that letter over the next week. It went through a dozen versions before I got it right. Dear Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've just learned that I left you nothing. I imagine you're shocked, hurt, probably angry. So let me explain. The night you sent that text message telling me not to contact you anymore, I changed my will. I removed you as my beneficiary and redirected everything to charities and causes I care about. I did it in anger and pain, yes, but also in a moment of clarity about my worth and about not accepting less than I deserved. You came back into my life after your accident. You apologized. You tried to make amends. And for 2 years, I watched to see if it was real. I'd like to tell you definitively whether I believe your intentions were pure, but the truth is, I never quite knew. That conversation about my estate planning, barely 6 months into our reconciliation, planted a seed of doubt I couldn't quite kill, and I couldn't bear to go through losing you again, so I kept this secret as protection. Maybe that makes me a terrible mother. Maybe I should have trusted you, should have given you the benefit of the doubt, should have changed the will back once we'd rebuilt our relationship. But Michael, I spent 50 years putting you first. I gave you everything I had and you threw me away with a text message. When you came back, I needed to know it wasn't just about money. I needed to know that your love for me wasn't conditional on what I could give you. I hope these last years were genuine. I hope you stayed in my life because you valued me, not because you expected to inherit. I hope the time we spent together meant as much to you as it did to me. But regardless of your motivations, I want you to understand something. You had the greatest inheritance anyone could ask for. You had a mother who loved you unconditionally for 48 years. You had someone who would have given you anything, who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. You threw that away, and when you came back, you got a second chance that most people never receive. Whether you deserved it or not, I gave you that grace. The money is going to help people who need it, to charities that will use it to make the world better, to causes I believe in. But you, Michael, you got something more valuable than $800,000. You got time with your mother before she died. You got to rebuild a relationship that you destroyed. You got forgiveness I didn't have to give. I hope that's enough. I hope when you look back on these last years, you remember them with love and not with resentment about money you never earned. I hope I was a good mother, even at the end when I couldn't quite trust you enough to restore your inheritance. And I hope you understand finally that love isn't something you can take for granted. It's something you nurture, something you protect, something you earn every single day. I loved you until my last breath. But I also learned to love myself enough not to be taken advantage of. Take care of Jessica and the children. Be the father to them that I tried to be as a mother to you. And every now and then, think of me with kindness, your mother. I sealed that letter and gave it to Richard with instructions to deliver it only after my death, along with the will. I told Michael about the kidney disease in February, on one of our Sunday calls. How bad is it? He asked, his voice tight with worry. Manageable. I have time, years probably. I just wanted you to know. He insisted on coming with me to my next doctor's appointment. He asked detailed questions about treatment options, dietary restrictions, what he could do to help. If he was acting, he was doing a remarkable job of it. Jessica called separately. Margaret, I'm so sorry. If you need anything, rides to appointments, help with groceries, anything, please let us know. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. I mean it. I know I haven't always treated you the way I should have, but you're family, and family takes care of each other. After she hung up, I sat with those words. Family takes care of each other. It had taken Jessica 6 years to understand that, but maybe she finally did. Or maybe she was just worried about the inheritance too. The doubt was exhausting, but I'd lived with it for 2 years now. I could live with it until the end. Spring came, and with it, Emma's 9th birthday. Michael called to invite me to the party and mentioned that Emma had specifically requested I bring Duke. She loves that dog almost as much as she loves you, Michael said, laughing. Duke was moving slowly these days, his muzzle almost completely white now, but he still perked up when we arrived at Michael's house, still let the children hug him gently, still pressed against my legs when I sat down. I watched my grandchildren play, watched Michael and Jessica interact with easy affection, watched this family that I was part of, but somehow still felt separate from. Emma came to sit beside me on the couch. Grandma, are you sad? No, sweetheart. Why do you ask? You look sad sometimes, even when you're smiling. Children see things adults miss. I'm not sad. I'm just thinking about how lucky I am to be here with you. I'm glad you're here too. I missed you all those times you weren't. I missed you too, Emma. She leaned against me and I put my arm around her, and for a moment all the doubt and pain and uncertainty fell away. This child loved me. That was real, even if nothing else was. Michael drove me home that evening. Duke was asleep in the back seat, worn out from the attention. Mom, can I ask you something? Michael said as we pulled into my driveway. My stomach tightened. Of course. Are you happy? With your life, I mean. With how things turned out. It was such an unexpected question that I didn't have a prepared answer. I'm content, I said finally. I have friends. I have Duke. I have purpose at the shelter. I have you and the grandchildren back in my life. I'm not sure happiness is something people my age experience the way we did when we were young, but content is good. Content is enough. I hope I gave you some of that contentment. I hope rebuilding with me has been good for you and not just another source of stress. It's been good, Michael. Complicated, but good. I love you, Mom. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. And I'm grateful for every chance you've given me. I love you too. I watched him drive away, and I wondered if I'd ever stop questioning whether he meant it. Duke died peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later. I found him in the morning, still warm, curled up in his bed by the window. The house felt impossibly empty without him. Michael came over as soon as I called. He helped me bury Duke in the backyard under the oak tree, and he held me while I cried. Do you want to stay with us for a few days? He offered. So you're not alone? No, thank you. I need to sit with this. I understand. But Mom, call me if you change your mind. Anytime, day or night. I mean that. After he left, I sat in the living room where Duke used to sleep, and I felt the weight of every loss I'd accumulated over 75 years. My husband leaving, my youth fading, my health declining, my dog gone, my son who I loved but couldn't quite trust. Helen came by in the evening with casserole and company. We sat in comfortable silence until finally she asked, "Are you going to get another dog?" "Eventually, when I'm ready. There's always another senior dog who needs someone. You're good at that, taking in the ones nobody else wants, giving them love even when they might not have much time left. Maybe that's my calling. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do with whatever time I have." Summer came, then fall again. I adopted another dog, a 10-year-old shepherd mix named Sadie, who'd been at the shelter for 8 months. She was wary at first, defensive, slow to trust. Reminded me of myself, honestly. But gradually she settled in and I discovered I could love again even with all the losses I'd carried. The kidney disease progressed slowly but steadily. By my 76th birthday, I'd started dialysis 3 times a week. It was exhausting, but it bought me time. Michael was there through all of it. He drove me to appointments when I was too tired. He researched treatment options. He called to check on me more than I called him now, and still I wondered. In October, Richard called. "Margaret, I need to update you on something. My health isn't great, and I'm fully retiring next month. I've transferred your files to my partner, Linda Chen. She's excellent, and she has copies of everything, including your will and the letter to Michael. Thank you for everything, Richard. You've been a good friend. You've been a remarkable client. And Margaret, for what it's worth, I think Michael really has changed. I think he loves you, but I understand why you needed the protection of that will. Sometimes the only way to be free is to know you have the power to walk away, even if you never use it." After we hung up, I thought about that. About power and protection and the freedom that comes from knowing you're choosing to stay, not trapped into staying. Maybe that's what the unchanged will had given me. The freedom to rebuild with Michael without the resentment of feeling obligated to forgive him. The freedom to love him while still protecting myself. Christmas that year was quiet. My energy was limited, and Michael suggested we celebrate at my house so I wouldn't have to travel. He brought the food, set everything up, and cleaned up afterward while I rested on the couch with Sadie. The grandchildren, Emma now 10, Noah 8, had made ornaments for my tree. Jessica had knitted me a blanket in colors she knew I loved. Michael gave me a photo album he'd put together. Pictures of us through the years, from his childhood to recent photos of us together. On the last page, he'd written, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. I love you, Mom." I cried when I read it. Not the sad tears I'd shed so often, but something more complicated. Grief and joy and regret and love all tangled together. That night, after everyone had left and it was just me and Sadie, I thought about the will one more time. I could change it. I could call Linda Chen tomorrow and restore Michael's inheritance. He'd been consistent for over 2 years now. He'd shown up when I got sick. He'd been there when Duke died. He'd proven himself in all the ways I'd needed him to prove himself. But something held me back. Some final piece of uncertainty. Some last remaining doubt that I couldn't quite silence. Or maybe it wasn't doubt at all. Maybe it was just the knowledge that Michael had already received the inheritance that mattered most. My time, my forgiveness, my love in the years I had left. The money would go to help others, and Michael would have something more valuable. Memories of a mother who loved him enough to give him a second chance, even if she couldn't quite trust him with her legacy. I fell asleep that night with Sadie's head on my lap, thinking about what I would say to Michael if I were brave enough to tell him about the will while I was still alive. But I wasn't that brave, and so I'd let the letter do it for me, after I was gone. He'd be hurt, he'd be angry, maybe he'd feel betrayed, but maybe he'd also understand that some things once broken can be repaired, but never quite made whole again, that you can forgive without forgetting, can love without complete trust, can give someone a second chance without erasing the first betrayal. And maybe, if I was very lucky, he'd look back on these last years and realize that the time we'd shared was worth more than any amount of money. I died on a Tuesday in March, 3 years and 2 months after Michael's text message had changed everything. It was peaceful. I'd been in hospice for a week, and Michael had been there at the end, holding my hand, telling me he loved me. My funeral was small but well attended. Friends from the shelter and book club, Helen, who'd been there through everything, Emma and Noah, crying quietly, Jessica, who seemed genuinely sad, and Michael, grief-stricken in a way that seemed real. The will reading was scheduled for a week later. Linda Chen gathered everyone in her office, Michael, Jessica, Helen as witness, and representatives from the 3 charities I'd designated. She read through the document clearly and professionally. When she got to the part about the charitable donations, Michael's face went white. I don't understand, he said. Where's my mother's house, her savings? There has to be something. The house and all assets have been sold or liquidated and divided according to your mother's wishes. The proceeds went to St. Jude's Children's Hospital, the city animal shelter, and a scholarship fund for non-traditional students at the community college. But I'm her son. Surely she left me something. Your mother left you this letter. Linda handed him an envelope. She requested that you read it here, in my presence. I imagine Michael's hands shaking as he opened it. I imagine his face as he read my words. The explanation, the doubt, the love, the consequences. I imagine Jessica reading over his shoulder, her face carefully neutral. I imagine the moment he got to the end, to the part where I said I hoped the time we'd shared was enough. Helen told me later, well, she didn't tell me I was dead, but I'd asked her to be there and report back to Richard when he'd still been alive, and somehow I like to think I know how it went. That Michael sat there for a long time, just holding that letter. Finally, he looked up at Linda. When did she change the will? The night you sent her that text message asking her not to contact you anymore. That was 3 years ago. We'd reconciled. She had 2 years to change it back. She chose not to. Why? If she'd forgiven me, if we'd rebuilt our relationship, why wouldn't she? His voice broke. Did she ever trust me again? Linda's expression was compassionate, but firm. Your mother left instructions that I could answer only one question beyond what's in the letter. You can ask me anything you want, but I'll only answer once. Michael sat with that for a moment. Then, did she die happy? In those last weeks, was she at peace with her decision? She died knowing she'd lived according to her values. She died believing she'd given you the most important inheritance, her time and her love. Whether that brought her happiness or peace, I can't say. But she died without regrets about the will. Michael nodded slowly. He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He stood up, and Jessica stood with him. Thank you, he said to Linda, for taking care of her, for respecting her wishes. As they walked to the door, Helen spoke up. Michael, he turned. Your mother talked to me a lot in those last years, and whatever doubts she had about your motivations, I want you to know. She saw you trying, she appreciated your efforts, and in her own way she forgave you. Just not enough to restore my inheritance. She restored something more important. She restored your relationship. She gave you back your mother for 3 years. That was the inheritance that mattered. After they left, Helen told the empty air where I no longer existed, that she hoped I'd been right, that the will had been fair, that the lesson had been just, that Michael would eventually understand. I hoped so too, but more than that, I hoped that when Michael tucked Emma and Noah into bed that night, he'd think about what I'd written, about love not being something you take for granted, about nurturing and protecting and earning it every day. I hoped he'd be the father to them that I'd tried to be to him, and I hoped that someday, when he was old and his own children were grown, he'd look back and understand that I'd given him the only inheritance that really mattered, the lesson that love, once lost, can be found again, but never quite the same. That forgiveness is possible even when complete trust isn't. That time is more valuable than money. And that the people we love deserve to be chosen every day, not just when it's convenient, not just when there's something to gain. I'd chosen him every day of his life, until the day he told me not to, and then I'd chosen myself. In the end, that was the inheritance I'd needed to leave, not just to him but to myself, the knowledge that I mattered, that my love had value, that I deserved better than being discarded with a text message, and that even at 73, starting over was possible, that there was life beyond being someone's mother, that I could build something new from the ashes of what I'd lost. I'd given Michael 3 years of rebuilt relationship, but I'd given myself 3 years of rebuilt self-worth, and in the final accounting, mine was the inheritance I valued most.